Harlem, New York, 2:47 p.m. Saturday, October 12, 1958. October rain mixed with cigarette butts and newspaper scraps, flowing in dark rivulets down the gutters of 135th Street. Inside Royal Crown Barbershop, the air hung thick with bay rum, hot lather, and the quiet murmur of men who understood the sacred rule. What happened in the chair stayed in the chair. The smell of antiseptic and pomade created a sanctuary where even kings could close their eyes. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson sat motionless in the second chair from the window, draped in a pristine white cape. His charcoal fedora rested on the counter beside folded leather gloves and a copy of the Amsterdam News. At 51 years old, his weekly take from Harlem's numbers and heroin operations exceeded $60,000. His word was law from 110th Street to the Harlem River. But in this moment, with hot towels wrapped around his face and a straight razor approaching his throat, he appeared vulnerable. He was not. At 2:49 p.m., the brass bell above the door chimed twice. Cold air swept in, carrying the stench of cheap cologne, wet wool, and something else, arrogance. 3 white men entered, their movements too deliberate for customers, too coordinated for coincidence. The lead man, Vincent Vinnie Scars Torino, a mid-level enforcer from the Genovese family, surveyed the room like a general inspecting conquered territory. His eyes settled on Bumpy with predatory satisfaction. The barbershop fell silent, without a word being spoken. Percy Washington, who had been cutting hair in Harlem since 1934, froze with his straight razor hovering inches from Bumpy's jawline. Every man in the room knew who sat in that chair, and they knew the 3 men walking in weren't there for haircuts. Torino's leather shoes clicked against the black and white checkered floor as he approached Bumpy's chair. He made a deliberate show of examining the other customers, all black men who had suddenly found their newspapers fascinating. His smile was the cold grin of a man who believed he held absolute power. "A nice little monkey house you got here, Johnson," Torino announced, his voice carrying across the shop like a slap. "Real, authentic." The word hung in the air like a live wire. 2 customers shifted uncomfortably. Percy's hand trembled, causing the razor to nick Bumpy's skin. A thin line of red appeared beneath the white lather. Torino stepped closer, invading the sacred space between man and blade. His breath, sour with whiskey and contempt, floated through the steam. "See, the thing is," he continued, pulling a folded envelope from his coat, "the neighborhood's under new management now, and management don't like complications." He slapped the envelope against Bumpy's chest, hard enough to make the cape rustle. Inside was a photograph, Bumpy's stepdaughter walking to school, circled in red ink. Below it, a handwritten note in block letters, 48 hours to vacate Harlem, or we start collecting family members. The threat against family crossed every line that existed in their world. Torino leaned in until his face was inches from Bumpy's ear. "You got 2 days to pack up your jungle operation and disappear, or I start teaching your little girl what real men look like." The barbershop became a tomb. Percy's razor clattered to the floor. The only sound was the slow drip of blood from Bumpy's neck onto the white cape, each drop spreading like a red flower on pristine cotton. Bumpy didn't flinch, didn't speak. He opened his eyes and stared at Torino with the cold precision of a scientist examining a specimen. 5 seconds of absolute silence passed. Then Bumpy smiled, not with fear, not with anger, but with the quiet certainty of a man who had already calculated every possible outcome of the next 72 hours. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You have until Monday, 3 o'clock, to come back here and apologize to every man in this room for what you just said, or I'm going to show you what family really means in Harlem." Torino laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the mirrors. "Monday. You'll be gone, Johnson, and if you ain't, your little girl's gonna learn some new lessons." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Johnson? Next time I see you in this chair, it's gonna be your coffin." The door slammed shut. The bell's chime faded into silence. What Torino didn't know was that Bumpy Johnson never made threats. He made promises, and the promise he had just made would require 14 pints of blood to fulfill. 73 hours and 26 minutes later, the floor of Royal Crown Barbershop would be painted red. By the time the police arrived, 3 men would need ambulances, 2 would never walk again, and Vincent Torino would spend 8 weeks in Bellevue Hospital learning that some sanctuaries are defended by demons. The story of how the Genovese family learned that threatening Bumpy Johnson's family was a death sentence is a warning that history has tried to hide. If you enjoy these deep dives into the underworld, you can support the channel by buying me a coffee using the link in the description. Your support keeps these investigations alive. Now, let's go back to Saturday, October 12th, 1958. In 1958, Harlem operated under rules that existed nowhere in legitimate America. While the rest of New York belonged to 5 Italian families carving up territories like European monarchs, the neighborhoods north of 110th Street answered to one man. Ellsworth Raymond Johnson controlled every significant criminal enterprise from Central Park to the Harlem River with mathematical precision. The numbers racket alone generated $38,000 weekly. Heroin distribution through carefully selected dealers brought in another $42,000. Protection money from businesses, after-hours clubs, and independent operators added $28,000 more. The mathematics were brutal and exact. Over $3 million annually flowed through Bumpy's operation with the efficiency of a Fortune 500 corporation. Among the people who lived there, Bumpy wasn't spoken of as a criminal. He was a regulator, a necessary force in a city that had already decided Harlem lives were expendable. His power had boundaries written in an arrangement the Italians called respect. The Treaty of 110th Street, negotiated in a Hudson River warehouse in March 1945, established the territorial lines that kept peace between worlds. Lucky Luciano, before his deportation, had personally brokered the arrangement with surgical precision. Italian families would control everything south of 110th Street. Harlem belonged to its own. No interference, no expansion attempts, no disrespect. In exchange, Bumpy agreed to maintain order that kept federal attention away from everyone's business. For 13 years, this treaty held because both sides understood that violation meant war nobody could afford. The arrangement generated wealth for everyone. Stability meant profit. Respect meant survival. Vincent Torino represented everything the treaty was designed to prevent. A Genovese soldier with 8 years of brutal collections in Italian neighborhoods, he specialized in violence against people who couldn't fight back. Broken fingers for late payments. Burned businesses for defiance. The Genovese family knew his nature when they selected him for Harlem expansion. They wanted someone who wouldn't hesitate, who wouldn't be intimidated by Bumpy's reputation, who saw black people as obstacles rather than equals. Torino wasn't chosen because he was smart. He was chosen because he was vicious and expendable. His fatal flaw was believing his skin color granted him immunity from consequences. The surveillance photographs arrived through Detective Raymond Schultz of the NIPD's 32nd Precinct, a corrupt cop earning $300 monthly for intelligence about Harlem operations. The images showed Bumpy's stepdaughter walking to school, shopping with her mother, playing in Marcus Garvey Park. 12 photographs total, each one a violation of the most sacred rule in organized crime. In the underworld, even during the bloodiest territorial wars, wives and children remained protected by an unwritten law older than the organizations themselves. This wasn't morality. This was survival. Once families became targets, violence became unlimited and uncontrollable. The photographs represented a declaration that old codes were obsolete. Bumpy's intelligence network operated with precision that would impress military strategists. Harlem's invisible workforce saw and heard everything men like Torino thought they were hiding. 2 weeks before the barbershop incident, he knew Torino's name, history, methods, and timeline. He could have disappeared or negotiated. Instead, he made a calculated decision that revealed his understanding of power. The decision to sit in the barber chair that Saturday wasn't submission, but strategic theater. He turned Royal Crown Barbershop into a stage for justice, positioning himself as vulnerable prey to draw the predator into fatal proximity. He absorbed the coming humiliation to justify the systematic destruction that would follow. At 11:47 p.m. Saturday night, Bumpy made 3 phone calls. Each conversation lasted exactly 90 seconds. When he hung up, 18 men across Harlem began preparing weapons. But the Genovese family had no idea they had just declared war on a king in his own castle. Sunday morning arrived with October sunlight filtering through stained glass windows at Abyssinian Baptist Church on 138th Street. Bumpy Johnson sat in the third pew from the front, dressed in a charcoal suit with his wife Mame beside him and his stepdaughter between them. To every observer, he appeared as he always did during Sunday service, attentive, respectful, calm. His hands rested motionless on the hymnal, while Reverend Powell's voice echoed through the sanctuary about forgiveness and divine justice. But behind his composed expression, calculations ran with mechanical precision. Torino's crew consisted of 6 men. The barbershop had 2 exits. Police response time to 135th Street averaged 11 minutes. The mathematics of revenge required accounting for every variable, every witness, every potential complication. While the congregation sang hymns of salvation, his mind was rehearsing 17 different scenarios and their outcomes. By noon, the incident had traveled through what locals called the Harlem Telegraph. The network that made Bumpy's empire function operated through relationships built over decades. Barbers talked to numbers runners talked to store owners talked to building superintendents. Information flowed through Harlem faster than telephone lines could carry it. The photograph of his stepdaughter violated something deeper than business arrangements. It attacked the one thing that separated Harlem's criminals from downtown's predators. Family was sacred ground. The community's response wasn't fear but rage. 37 men contacted Bumpy's lieutenants, volunteering for whatever action was required. The message was unanimous. This disrespect demanded blood. Downtown in a smoke-filled bar on Mulberry Street, Vincent Torino celebrated his perceived dominance with expensive whiskey and cheaper company. His voice carried across the room as he described his Saturday performance with theatrical pride. He told anyone who would listen about cleaning out the monkeys from Harlem, about how Johnson sat there like a scared boy getting his first haircut, about how easy it would be to take over operations once the old man ran. He purchased rounds for Genovese soldiers who laughed at his descriptions and encouraged his delusions. His overconfidence was the arrogance of a man who had never faced real consequences, who believed his affiliation provided absolute protection. Every word he spoke was being recorded in the memory of bartenders who passed information uptown. Systematic preparation began at 2:15 p.m. Sunday. Bumpy's 3 primary lieutenants received assignments that required military precision. Willie the Eye Patterson mapped Torino's movements over the previous 2 weeks, identifying patterns in his schedule. Marcus Numbers Green compiled information on Torino's crew, their weapons preferences, their criminal histories, their personal weaknesses. James Quiet Robinson located 3 safe houses Torino used across the Bronx and Lower Manhattan. By 6 p.m., Bumpy possessed a complete tactical profile of his enemy. He knew where Torino ate breakfast, which women he visited, which bars he frequented, and which weapons he carried. Information was the foundation of power. At 7:30 p.m., 4 community leaders arrived at Bumpy's brownstone on Edgecombe Avenue. These men represented legitimate Harlem, the ministers and business owners who maintained public respectability while understanding the necessary evil that kept their neighborhoods stable. They came with desperate appeals. A war with the Italian families would bring federal attention nobody could afford. Investigations would destroy everyone's operations. The community couldn't survive that level of scrutiny. They begged Bumpy to find another solution, to negotiate, to back down from confrontation. Bumpy listened without interruption, then delivered his response with absolute certainty. There will be no war, only correction. The distinction was precise. War implied extended conflict. Correction meant punishment that ended disputes permanently. Sunday night surveillance began at 9:45 p.m. Torino's crew positioned themselves in vehicles near Royal Crown Barbershop, watching for signs that Bumpy was preparing to flee or fortify. They saw nothing unusual. What they didn't see were the watchers observing them from rooftops and doorways, documenting their positions, counting their weapons, noting their communications. Torino's men believed they were predators stalking prey. They were specimens being studied before extermination. Monday, 6:23 a.m., 8 hours and 37 minutes before the appointment with death. At 10:15 p.m., Sunday, one of Bumpy's scouts reported that Torino had purchased additional weapons and recruited 2 more men. The barbershop confrontation was escalating into an execution, but Torino had made one critical error. He assumed Bumpy would come alone. Monday morning at Royal Crown Barbershop opened with deceptive normalcy at exactly 8 a.m. Percy Washington swept the checkered floor, arranged his tools with practiced precision, and prepared the first batch of hot lather while early customers arrived seeking shaves before work. The radio played low jazz, newspapers rustled in waiting hands, and the familiar smell of bay rum mixed with coffee created an atmosphere of routine sanctuary. But every detail had been strategically arranged during Sunday night's preparation. The chair closest to the back exit was marked out of order with a hand-written sign. Mirrors were angled to provide complete visual coverage of the entrance and eliminate blind spots. The phone line had been quietly disconnected to prevent emergency calls. Even the placement of towels, magazines, and ashtrays served tactical purposes that would become clear at 3 p.m. At 6:45 a.m., Percy Washington received instructions that transformed him from neighborhood barber into unwilling soldier. Bumpy explained with surgical clarity what would happen during the afternoon and what Percy's role would be in the coming violence. He would position Bumpy in the second chair with unobstructed sight lines to the door. He would keep his straight razor ready, but avoid using it unless directly threatened. Most critically, he would testify afterward that Torino's crew had attacked each other in a dispute over territory and money. Percy's hands trembled as he grasped the implications, understanding that his barbershop would witness history written in blood. Refusal meant becoming a target himself. In Harlem, neutrality was reserved for people who didn't own businesses that could be burned. The positioning began at 1:30 p.m. with military precision. 5 men entered Royal Crown Barbershop at staggered intervals, each appearing as ordinary customers seeking afternoon grooming. Marcus Green sat near the front window reading the Amsterdam News, his brass-knuckled fist concealed beneath the folded pages. Willie Patterson occupied the chair closest to the door, his overcoat hiding 2 ice picks strapped against his ribs. James Robinson stood near the magazine rack, his newspaper wrapped around a leather sap filled with steel ball bearings. 2 additional soldiers positioned themselves in waiting chairs, both carrying straight razors identical to Percy's professional tools. Their weapons were selected for close-quarters combat that wouldn't create noise or evidence contradicting the planned narrative. No firearms, no knives requiring explanation. Only tools that belonged in a barbershop or could be explained as improvised weapons grabbed during panic. External security established positions at 2 p.m. across 135th Street. 2 marksmen occupied third-floor windows in the residential building directly opposite, their rifles concealed behind curtains but with clear firing lines to the barbershop entrance. Their orders were specific and limited. Fire only if Torino's crew brought automatic weapons or if civilian lives were directly threatened. Otherwise, remain invisible. The snipers existed as insurance, ensuring the violence remained contained within four walls rather than spilling onto Harlem streets where federal attention would follow. Torino's final preparations revealed his fatal assumption that overwhelming force guaranteed victory. He arrived at a garage on 125th Street at 2:15 p.m. with 5 men, all carrying concealed firearms and displaying the swagger of executioners who believed their target was already defeated. Torino distributed final instructions while checking his nickel-plated revolver, the same weapon he'd used in 3 previous killings. His plan was simple and brutal. Walk in, humiliate Johnson publicly, execute him, leave the body as a message that Harlem operated under new management. He anticipated resistance from perhaps one loyal customer, but nothing his crew couldn't eliminate in seconds. The countdown began with mechanical precision. 2:30 p.m., Torino's crew departed in 2 vehicles. 2:42 p.m., hot towels were applied to Bumpy's face, creating the image of complete vulnerability. 2:56 p.m., 5 soldiers exited their cars and began walking toward the entrance with synchronized timing. At 2:58 p.m., Torino's crew surrounded Royal Crown Barbershop, 6 armed men against 1 man in a barber chair. The odds seemed impossible, but in exactly 2 minutes, those odds would reveal themselves to be a carefully constructed illusion. The brass bell chimed at exactly 3:00 p.m., its metallic sound cutting through the afternoon stillness like a death knell. Vincent Torino pushed through the door with theatrical confidence, his leather shoes striking the checkered floor in deliberate rhythm, while 5 armed soldiers followed in practiced formation. The barbershop felt exactly as he remembered it from Saturday's humiliation. Same mirrors reflecting afternoon light. Same smell of bay rum and antiseptic. Same man draped in white, apparently helpless in the second chair. Torino's eyes swept the room with predatory satisfaction, cataloging 3 customers absorbed in newspapers, an elderly barber frozen with obvious terror, and his primary target positioned exactly where intelligence had promised he would be. But Bumpy Johnson's eyes were open, alert, tracking every movement with the cold precision of a mathematician solving an equation he had written himself. The hot towels were arranged to obscure his expression without blocking his vision, and his hands rested beneath the cape not in surrender, but in readiness. When Torino approached within arm's reach, Bumpy's gaze locked onto him with an intensity that should have triggered every survival instinct evolution had provided. Instead, Torino saw only what his arrogance allowed him to see. Torino drew his nickel-plated revolver and pressed the barrel against Bumpy's temple with enough force to leave an indentation. His voice carried across the barbershop with rehearsed cruelty designed for maximum psychological impact before the killing stroke. "Time's up, Johnson. You didn't run, so now you die. But first, you're gonna beg." He wanted submission, public degradation, the satisfaction of watching Harlem's king reduced to pleading wreckage before the final bullet ended the humiliation. His crew positioned themselves to control both exits while savoring their commander's performance. Bumpy didn't speak. He simply raised his left hand and snapped his fingers once. The sound was sharper than breaking glass. The illusion shattered with choreographed precision that transformed customers into executioners in under 3 seconds. Marcus Green's newspaper dropped as his brass-knuckled fist connected with the nearest soldier's jaw, producing the wet crack of bone separating from bone. Willie Patterson rose from his chair and drove both ice picks into the kidneys of the man beside him before the target could draw his concealed weapon. James Robinson's weighted sap crushed the kneecap of a 3rd soldier who collapsed without screaming. The 2 men in waiting chairs moved simultaneously, straight razors opening with metallic whispers as they attacked the remaining crew members. Each action was calculated for maximum damage with minimum noise. No gunshots to alert police, no screams to draw witnesses from the street. Just systematic brutality executed with the efficiency of a surgical procedure. Torino's supreme confidence disintegrated into animal panic as he realized his fatal miscalculation. He wasn't standing in a barbershop. He was positioned on a killing floor designed specifically for his correction. His crew was being dismantled with precision, while his revolver remained pressed uselessly against his target's head. Before he could fire, Bumpy's hand shot from beneath the cape and seized Torino's wrist with crushing force, twisting until small bones ground together and the weapon clattered across the checkered floor. Bumpy rose from the chair with deliberate slowness, the white cape falling away to reveal steady hands and an expression of absolute certainty. Percy Washington stood paralyzed behind his counter as Bumpy reached past him and selected a straight razor, testing its edge against his thumb with the casual precision of a craftsman choosing the proper tool. Satisfied, he turned his attention to Torino with the focused intensity of a judge delivering sentence that had been predetermined by the defendant's own actions. The controlled brutality that followed served purposes beyond simple revenge. Bumpy broke the fingers of Torino's right hand individually, each fracture representing a word from Saturday's threat against his family. "This is the hand you used to threaten children," he whispered with surgical calm. He used Percy's razor to slice precise lines across Torino's cheek and mouth, marking the face that had spoken slurs and violated sacred boundaries. Each injury was calculated to leave permanent reminders without causing death. This wasn't execution. This was education, written in flesh and bone. Percy Washington and two genuine customers pressed themselves against the far wall, understanding that what they witnessed was necessary correction of an imbalance that threatened everyone's survival. Their silence was guaranteed not by fear alone, but by recognition that justice was being administered according to rules older than legal codes. At 3:07 p.m., with 5 men bleeding on the checkered floor, Bumpy pulled out a business card and began writing. What he wrote on that card would become legend in the underworld. But first, he had to ensure Torino lived long enough to deliver the message. Royal Crown Barbershop at 3:08 p.m. resembled a slaughterhouse designed by a mathematician. Blood spread across the black and white checkered floor in patterns that mapped the systematic violence with grotesque precision. Arterial spray decorated one mirror where Willie Patterson's ice picks had found their marks, while handprints smeared across another where a soldier had tried to brace himself before collapsing. The waiting chair lay splintered under the weight of a 200-pound enforcer whose kneecap had been destroyed by James Robinson's weighted sap. Shattered glass from a display case mixed with blood and bay rum, creating a slick surface that made standing treacherous. The air carried the heavy metallic stench of iron layered over antiseptic, transforming the sanctuary of grooming into a theater of correction. Torino's systematic destruction continued with surgical precision that transformed punishment into educational demonstration. Bumpy worked methodically through each bone that would carry permanent reminders of Saturday's violation. The left radius snapped with a sound like green wood splitting, representing the threat against his stepdaughter. The right ulna followed for the violation of photographing his family without permission. 3 ribs cracked in calculated sequence for the slurs spoken in this sacred space. Each fracture was delivered with accuracy that maximized pain while avoiding fatal damage, ensuring Torino would live to deliver the message carved into his skeleton. His face, marked with Percy's razor, would heal into permanent scars that spelled out the price of disrespect in tissue that couldn't be erased or forgotten. At 3:10 p.m., Bumpy retrieved a pristine business card from his vest pocket, cream-colored stock with embossed lettering reading simply, Ellsworth Johnson, consultant. On the blank reverse, he wrote in precise block letters using a fountain pen that contrasted grotesquely with the surrounding carnage. Family is sacred. Disrespect has consequences. Tell your bosses the rent for Harlem just went up, BJ. The message wasn't merely personal revenge, but diplomatic communication to the entire Genovese organization, establishing boundaries, asserting dominance, and demanding tribute simultaneously. The card's placement transformed it from message into permanent warning. Bumpy positioned it carefully on Torino's blood-soaked chest, then drove Percy's straight razor through both card and fabric with enough force to anchor it in the muscle beneath. The blade bit just deep enough to hold firm without causing fatal injury, ensuring the message would travel with Torino through surgery, recovery, and every conversation he would have with downtown leadership for the remainder of his abbreviated career. Cleanup operations began with military efficiency that impressed even the genuine witnesses. Bumpy's soldiers collected their weapons while repositioning Torino's crew to suggest internal conflict rather than external execution. Bodies were arranged to tell a specific narrative, territorial dispute escalating to violence, crew members turning on each other in chaotic bloodshed. 3 men remained alive intentionally, their survival serving strategic purposes beyond mercy. They would carry accurate accounts to downtown circles, while their injuries counseled caution rather than revenge. At 3:16 p.m., distant sirens announced police response, triggered by anonymous calls reporting gunshots that had never occurred. Bumpy returned to the barber chair with theatrical precision, allowing Percy to drape the white cape across his chest and resume the interrupted shave. When officers burst through the door, they would find him exactly where witnesses claimed he'd been throughout the incident, an innocent customer caught in Italian family business. Detective Frank Castellano arrived at 3:19 p.m. to find 6 men bleeding, 3 unconscious, and Bumpy Johnson calmly finishing his shave. The detective, a 20-year veteran, would later say it was the most controlled crime scene he'd ever witnessed. But the real mystery was what Torino whispered to the paramedics as they loaded him into the ambulance. Bellevue Hospital admitted Vincent Torino at 4:23 p.m., with injuries requiring 3 surgical teams working in rotation. Medical documentation recorded 17 broken bones, including compound fractures in both forearms, crushed metacarpals, eliminating fine motor control permanently, 3 cracked ribs, and a shattered kneecap requiring steel reinforcement. Facial lacerations necessitated 83 stitches administered by plastic surgeons who understood the scars would remain visible despite their expertise. Nerve damage in his dominant hand ended any future requiring weapons proficiency or physical intimidation. The attending physician noted confidentially that injuries displayed systematic precision, inconsistent with chaotic violence, suggesting calculated punishment rather than spontaneous combat. Torino would survive, but the man who entered Royal Crown Barbershop with supreme confidence would never leave that hospital bed intact. The message reached Genevieve's leadership through channels, bypassing official police reports. Anthony Fat Tony Salerno received a manila envelope at his Sullivan Street Social Club containing Bumpy's blood-stained business card attached to shirt fabric, accompanied by hospital admission paperwork and medical bills exceeding $50,000. The card's message required no interpretation. Family is sacred. Disrespect has consequences. Tell your bosses the rent for Harlem just went up. The demand wasn't negotiable, but notification of terms already in effect. Emergency meetings convened Tuesday morning in basement rooms where million-dollar decisions were made without written records. The Genovese family faced brutal mathematics. Torino's failed expansion had cost credibility, money, and 6 hospitalized soldiers. Continued conflict with Bumpy Johnson would require resources exceeding potential Harlem profits while attracting federal attention nobody could afford. By Wednesday afternoon, all Genovese operations north of 110th Street were abandoned, their territories absorbed into Bumpy's expanding empire. The economic impact transformed Harlem's criminal landscape within 2 weeks. Bumpy's weekly revenue increased from $62,000 to $80,000 as he consolidated abandoned gambling operations, heroin distribution networks, and protection territories. The correction at Royal Crown Barbershop generated more profit than a year of negotiation, proving strategic violence remained the most efficient business tool when applied with precision. Community reaction elevated the barbershop from neighborhood business to cultural monument. Royal Crown became pilgrimage destination for residents who understood the symbolic victory occurring within those walls. No one threatens Harlem's families. The message resonated beyond criminal circles into legitimate community consciousness, transforming Bumpy's reputation from gangster to guardian among residents who saw him as the only force capable of checking downtown aggression. Federal investigation began Thursday when FBI agents opened Case File 58 HQ 1847, documenting potential organized crime violence. Agents interviewed 17 witnesses over 3 weeks, compiling reports documenting universal consistency in testimony. Torino's crew had attacked each other during internal dispute over territory and money. Not a single witness contradicted this narrative, despite obvious inconsistencies in physical evidence. The FBI understood they were being stonewalled, but lacked leverage to break community silence, protecting Harlem's king. 6 months later, Vincent Torino disappeared from New York without forwarding address. Genevieve's leadership relocated him to Tampa, Florida, managing a legitimate restaurant under constant supervision, his presence in New York deemed too dangerous for everyone involved. His disappearance carried its own message about mistakes that cannot be survived in cities where they occurred. The legend spread through organized crime networks nationwide with the efficiency of profitable information. Chicago, Detroit, and Los Angeles syndicates studied the lesson. Bumpy Johnson's family is untouchable. For the next decade, no Italian crime family attempted expansion into Harlem or threats against families operating north of 110th Street. Decades later, Percy Washington revealed that Bumpy paid $17,000 for complete barbershop renovation and provided lifetime protection guarantees extending to Percy's children and grandchildren. The bloodstains were scrubbed from Royal Crown Barbershop's floor in October 1958. But the message written in that blood remained carved into organized crime history. Some men cannot be threatened, some families cannot be touched, and some sanctuaries, when violated, become execution chambers. Vincent Torino learned that lesson at 3 p.m. on a Monday afternoon. The cost of that education was 17 broken bones, facial reconstruction surgery, and a lifetime of looking over his shoulder. The floor was covered in red before the police arrived. But the real question was never about the blood. It was about the respect. And in Harlem, respect was always paid in full.